So we will go ahead with the second session. We know that you have lots of questions. We're very happy that you're interacting with us. This is what this session is about. And just don't worry. I really want to reassure you that this is a concept that we're developing. We're developing with you. We might not have everything already mapped out, but we will get there with you. So I just want to really reassure you that everything's going to be fine. Change sometimes is difficult, but with a group like you, I'm sure we're going to be just fine. So I just want you to bear that in mind, please.
I believe her because Jessica said so.
Exactly.
So I will not steal much time of the team because they have a lot of stuff to say. But I would like to just remind all of you and put it in your head that we are looking at what will be audited. We are not there how yet. It will be next session, so keep it in mind. And whatever is written here, we are looking what are the items to be audited. And we are focusing on IGOM, Chapter 3 and 4, which is safety, RAM safety, and aircraft turnaround. And 1 and 2, baggage and passenger and baggage will come later. We are starting on it. So at this moment, it's just what, right? So if you're asking what you want me, how you want me to observe it and how many flights, we are not there yet. We have some thoughts, but it would be premature to share. But we hear your questions because it actually helps us to start to work on the technique. So whatever comments was said here, we heard it, we wrote it down, and we will work on it. We will also consult you because it's a different story. So at this moment, we are presenting you what. Once we have the what done, we're going to look at it or how. So to you.
Good afternoon once again. And before we start the actual session, we're not going to show any presentation. We'll save time and we'll directly move to the checklist portion. But before that, from the last 3 days, the 3 important words what we are hearing now: standardization, innovation, sustainability. So when we look into that and when we were looking into our new vision of the ISEGO and the IGOM, it gives us a lot of strength to us that we are going in the right direction. So standardization, going forward, we're going to do the audit against the standardized procedure throughout the globe. Wherever you go, you're going to do the audit against the IGOM. That is standardization. Sustainability, we definitely, to sustain, we need a change. So ISEGO is from last 15 years, we did so many changes. Now there is another change. So we need to be sustained as per the industry is growing and the expansion. So I will now request Steve and JJ to give their introduction. And then we'll start continuing displaying the Excel sheet. We'll directly start the checklist. Steve?
Okay, good afternoon again, everyone. It was a pleasure to see you all yesterday and to have the opportunity to talk to you today. My name is Steve Ottaway. I worked for Donata for the last 10 years. I was a couple of years in Bahrain before that, and then 32 years with British Airways. So I've got sort of experience of both ground handling and airline. In relation to today's session, I'm also a member of the GOS operations team that are tasked with developing and amending the IGOM, and I have been since, I think, edition 4. Not as long as JJ, but since edition 4. Just one thing for me personally. I, as a young engineer, believed I was indestructible, and I would do ground engine runs and keep one can of my safety ear defenders on the top of my head. As a result, I am fairly deaf and wear 2 hearing aids. Life is just about survivable when you're also quite short-sighted and you have to have hearing aids and glasses behind your ears. I can tell you 3 minutes ago, life became far more complicated. Now I've got a whole lot more gizmos behind my ears. I can barely keep my head up. I'm sinking. When it comes to the questions, it would really help me personally if you could wait for the microphone, and I'll apologise to you all in advance if you ask me a question even through the microphone and I still say something like, yes, I'll be there next Tuesday. Please forgive me. You'll just know I've misunderstood what you said, and one of my colleagues will give you the right answer. But that's me, and I look forward to the next 2 hours.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeroen Jaartsveld. I like they also pronounce me as JJ. There's another JJ in the room. He's there. So hopefully we will not mix them up. Let's call me JJ from the IGAM. I was there already for 11 years with IATA, and I was the chairman for the technical group, which was before the GOS. For KLM, I am a technical expert on ground handling now. Started my career 22 years ago in operation, from passenger handling, load control, loading supervision, de-icing, hub control, and now went into the office 12 years ago and did auditing part, safety and compliance from there. And now I'm responsible for the belowing procedures for our airline. So already a lot of experience with the IGAM, and hopefully we can solve all your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you, JJ. And before we proceed with the checklist, I request Massimo to give us a brief on the new IGOM portal. This is how you're going to see the GSP when they are doing the gap analysis. So he will show you the actual IGOM portal. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Just a second that I plug me my computer. So let's hope that if you can please from the colleagues can have the share of the screen. Yeah, here we go. So what we have done, for those who were in the working group, and I see, where is Max? I see Max somewhere. Where is, ciao Max. You remember we discussed that since a long time that one of the challenges that we were having was to have essentially how we track variation of the airline, right? So, and then say what could be a standardized manner to track variations. So the idea, after various consultation with the ground operation working group and the other stakeholders, was to have an online platform to essentially do the gap analysis. There's a registration process which is completely free for airline and ground handlers organization. So each ground handler organization at a given station can create a profile of a station where they declare what type of service they do, what type of, is the station profile, the type of equipment they have. And an airline can have also a profile into the portal. We have an invitation feature, so we receive requests through IATA.org. We go through and we evaluate if they're pristine organization. I received some requests from some of you auditors, but we don't have at the moment access for auditors. We are working on it. We will eventually display what is the project to come when we're going to give access. Now, the access is only an airline organization and a ground handling organization. They have also an invitation features where they can invite anybody of the organization to join the account and assign any person a role. So, for example, me, Massimo, I am now the air test. We have here air test in the portal to also monitor that all the functionality works. And I can invite Eva, I can invite Sunny, I can invite JJ, whoever, and I can create my account and assign them a role. So let's go directly to the live demo. So I access here the IGOM portal, and there's various banners. So here are all the members that we have. We have 73 entities, 58 airline, 11 ground handling organization. I need to scroll if we have new people that have invited, have joined. So in those days that we are here in the IGHC. So let's start with a couple of functionalities. So here we have a station administration. Here is where you can assign a role once you invite a person on your organization, and I can decide if this person can be another admin, can be an editor, or a viewer, or an acknowledger. An acknowledger is more a function that we keep for the station. They receive notification from their line, and they can acknowledge that they have received and distributed the update and the procedures. Station relationship. For those who in the past were working in the airline industry, you know that maybe me as British Airways, I don't want to share my variation with KLM. Or I may want to instead share and know. But there's also competition between ground handling organization and ground handling organization and airline. So if you want to create a connection, you have to invite the other organization. There's two different types of situation here. This one that I've done, as you see here on the left, I have KLM. That's we did with Iran, because Iran is the first airline that have published their gap analysis and their variation online. So, sorry guys, but I want to give them an applause. And it's available now in the portal, okay? So KLM has gone through the gap analysis. They have published 23 variations, as far as I remember. But we're trying to test if I can see them, and he can see me with my account. And it does work. Okay? So this is one of the things. So, or I can choose to ask a station to be a child in the relationship. So what does it mean, this? Ground handling organization, big one, that have multiple stations under an headquarter, they can create this hierarchy group, meaning, for example, the NATA Dubai from Stephen, they can publish a corporate gap analysis. Then Melbourne pick this corporate gap analysis and write if they have any local variation in Melbourne, which might be different from the one they have in London, because most likely a ground handler, they might have few corporate variations, but the most of the variation typically a ground handler have are station variation that are coming from primarily airport authority regulation or regulation that are on site. So they eventually may not even be able to perform as per IGOM because there's a local rule that prevents them to do so. So with this, we can essentially clone what a corporate organization is doing and then overwrite for the station characteristics. So although the NATA, they have 95% the same, there will be 2 or 3% of variance. I use the NATA just because Steve is here. At each have a different station. So this is the way it works. So here I can create hierarchy group. Here I invite another organization where we share visibility. So a ground handling perform a gap analysis and list if they have variations. An airline do the same. The concept is that when an airline click on conformity, means that they accept to be handled as per IGOM. When they click variation, we don't just ask them if it is above, below, more, different. We just want to know if the airline want to have something different on site that the ground handling have to perform on top of IGOM or different than IGOM. We also have in the IGOM adoption policy a recommendation for the airline to do a risk assessment if they do deviate from safety critical procedures. Same is for the ground handling organization. The tool is quite new, and we are going to improve with this project here some of the functionality. The first feedback was received from your own. I got other from Robert Mans from Air Canada. We'll try to make it more and more user-friendly. But going to the gap analysis here, we can choose to have a new file or continue a draft that we have started. When we choose this new file from previous version, that's exactly what we were explaining before. If the NATA, for example, the Singapore test has been published, right? I can pick that one, rename it Melbourne, the NATA, overwrite it, or confirm as it is, and publish. But that will be my Melbourne station, and then I will be my Sydney station, and I will have my Dubai station. Now, if I start here a new file, we'll do a COPA test, and I click on continue. Here I have all my IGOM gap analysis loaded, okay? There's no content of IGOM here at the moment. We are exploring with our commercial team whether it would be possible to include also the content of IGOM, but we don't have at the moment these capabilities. So it's essentially an online gap analysis. So when I click, for example, here on this general, I choose here what is the user provision, and I start to benchmark. Now let's see where you find the user provision. To start, you can go on this section, documents, and you can upload all your reference document. So as long as we know that there's different documentation management system in any type of organization, if you add, for example, a document, you have to say what type of document it is. In this case, we chose URL-based organization. The document is SCOPA. I decide an abbreviation, CPA. I have edition, version, revision. Now, you as auditor know better than me that some organization, they have only revision numbers, some edition and revision, some versions and revision, so you never know what the hell is going on. There's no structure, so they have only at least as a minimum either the edition or the version or the revision number has to be inserted. So in this case, I will do revision 1, version nothing, and I do when is the published date. So this is month, day, and year. So let's say today is 2nd of June, so 06/02/2022, not 22, 2022. Review date is only for the when you have a web-based document. So you need to say each time when it's being reviewed. Now that is already in this IGHC standard. And I put which is the effective date of the document, right? So let's say it's going to be effective, let's say in 20 days. So I choose 07/01/2022. I can also upload the physical document, right? Or I can just upload the reference. So in the project, what we want to do is there will be a chance for them to upload also the document so that the auditor can eventually then review directly on the portal the document reference. So I can browse a file and upload a physical document, and I do save. This is something that we have not yet discussed from auditing perspective, but here we have two options, adopt IGOM or add the document. So the adopt IGOM option is available only when the gap analysis is empty. So for an organization, let's say we have fully adopted IGOM, for example, a ground handling, they can choose adopt IGOM. In this case, all their gap analysis will turn green, and all the reference will be the one of the IGOM. Now for simplicity, I choose adopt IGOM. Now if I go back to my gap analysis, you will see that all my gap analysis has been turned green. Here I have a progress for each type of things, right? Nonetheless, even if I have adopt IGOM, I still might have variations. So even this can work for an airline. So we have accept IGOM as a whole because it's easier, so as such, but we have some variations. So I want to change from, for example, this check-in types. Instead of IGOM, I will choose the document I have just uploaded, the CPA edition 1, and my reference is, 1.2. And I click on variation. You see, this is already in yellow. Means this is a non-safety critical variation. In IGOM, we have where is marked a safety critical variation versus where it's not, and the system already picked from the XML file whether this is a safety critical variation or not. This part, comments, is only for me as an organization to write something. For example, we need to rethink about these procedures. It's not going to be visible to any of your partners that you share information with. And here, when I have my variation description, okay? So here where I effectively write what I want the handler to do. So as an example, this is my variation. Not this way. And for those organizations that, for example, publish the documentation system in 2 languages, English and perhaps Chinese, or sometimes it's only Chinese, and they have distribution also internally, they can also add the variation into another language, right? So they can choose which language they want to do, in Albanian, whatever it is, they can write their procedures, right? And there's also an option to upload a physical document, could be a picture, an attachment, supplementary information, and then you do save. The moment you do save, you see here, we have already got the variation. Now, all of this, once it's finished, can be published. The good thing is that each time I change a document, right, as an example, let's pick that the document address, this one. Okay, I do edit. Now I am doing a revision of my own documentation system, and this becomes revision 3, or 23, or 3. If I save it, the system automatically picks that you have a revision, and will realign all the documentation numbers and references to the original gap file. Another good news that will save, we believe, we hope, save a lot of time. You see this symbol, this little symbol yellow here, this one. This one means that here we have done a change in the argument, whether this is an introduction or a revision of procedures. Okay, so now we are in edition 11. So once they complete the gap analysis, when they do edition 12, they only have to complete the new things that has been introduced in IGON. And even if you introduce a numbering system, for example, in between 112 or 113, the system does not follow the number. It follows the so-called unique ID. So it is associated with another element that the passenger's activity and check-in counter requirements, if I introduce something in between, of course, my check-in counter requirement will become 113. But the system will realign automatically the reference to the new numbering because it doesn't follow also another type of logic. Okay? So the first thing they need to do is to confirm that all the references are still valid, and then they will have to overwrite and complete with edition 12 the gap to perform the changes. At the end of it, we have some dashboard, which Jeroen is very happy with. Actually, it was a bit of luck in development. We are trying to improve.
There are some improvements there.
So I exit the gap analysis, and each time I publish, I can push a notification to the members that are in my network, that I publish a new gap analysis, and they can acknowledge. When I push the, let's say when I publish something, I do have all the notification that I send. There can be two different types of notification, an action required or an informative. An informative notification is from a ground handler to an airline. An action required is only from an airline to a ground handler. So I send you something and I'm expecting you to acknowledge that you have received these new informations, and there's a tracking reception that you have acknowledged this information, okay? You can also send an informative notification if you wish, because maybe it does not require necessarily an action. Who is going to receive it? The admin of the account and the acknowledger of the account. This notification, they can click on acknowledge with a tracking date and time that they have acknowledged that KLM procedures that maybe your own is going to change in, I don't know, 1 week, has been acknowledged, so it's going to be live. Or I can send a manual notification. So in this case, we have shared with Jeroen. I can send to Jeroen a notification and ask him to, what is the subject, what is the message I want to send, and he will receive a notification from me. There's an option for members to unflag the notification. So if I don't want to receive informative notification, I can say, no, thank you, I don't want to have it. But the action required from the airline to ground handler, you cannot say you don't want to receive. So this is more or less all of it. So when we do, for example, let me go back to the gap analysis. We want to publish something. Let's see if you have something that is finalized. Not really. Okay, forget about it. So once we publish, we define to whom we want to send this notification, and the variation will be available in the variation report. Now here, I will go with our go to my report. We have a glitch, now we're still working on it. You remember this, Jeroen? We were viewing with KLM. This is a bit weird, but it does work. So that was, for example, my variation. It was in check-in counter, right? And that was my variation. In this case, I write test Ruben. It was my IT guy that was testing if the thing. So I will not share the variation of KLM because this is not now the purpose, but just to give you a little bit of flavor. So here we have in our members, they start to kind of publish their variation reports already. So as long as we start to move forward, we will see that there's members that have published already variation. We have Icelandair, Malaysian, NEOS, KLM. They are coming. The variation are coming from the line. We don't have yet many ground handler organizations in the portal. They are still joining, but that for them will be mandatory to perform their gap analysis, right? confirm whether they conform or not, what is the reference number in the tool. And that will generate a report that will be available for auditors, essentially, then to check for the documentation. Now, I won't go to the auditing of this. I'm just displaying the tool. Do you have any questions so far? No, I'm not going to stay till the end. For the IGON portal, I can stay till now. Yeah.
Wait for the microphone. Just wait for the microphone.
The tool, for me, is very useful, especially for the customer lines, and it would be also useful for us, I believe, as auditors, because it depends which kind of tool would you like to implement that we can use for the purpose of seeing the variation of the customer lines that have to be audited. So basically, if we have to check the cone position, if there is the possibility to go directly from the section of the icon that we look at, directly to the variation, it would be really useful, I think.
And that's the plan. So as I was telling you yesterday, and you might not remember too many information, we're gonna add the chapter 11, the training. That's why we have to structure in a number. That's the reason. And we will create a validation, something how it's called, validation module, if you wish. And it will have in very brief, it's very complicated, the business requirements, but in very brief, it will give you access to the gap analysis of the handler. You will see their document references. You will see their own variation. You will not see airline variation because we are not auditing airlines variation. You only see handler variation. And you will also see some standards which will be available, or which will be selected via whatever formula for you to verify. We're not going to do 100% of it because it's IGOM, 6 chapters, chapter 11, so it will be too much, but that you will see some standards to be validated on general idea to give you. So we are planning to have auditors in it. You will not see airlines variation necessarily, but their own.
Also, go ahead. Also, Gabriele, there's another point that the idea is to have out of all the requirement of IGOM, there will be a sampling that will be eventually decided based on a certain number of safety critical, a certain number of, let's say, pushback, a certain number of on a random, so that you will go and have to validate. So you don't have to go through all the number. It's absolutely impossible to go.
No. I mean, there are variation of the customer line that can be interesting to see, but not for auditing the airline itself, for auditing how the handler handled the airlines. For example, nowadays, we audited the variation of the airlines, how they apply the variation of the airlines, double checking on the manual of the customer airlines through their system, for example. So we already do that. Mm-hmm.
Well, the visibility for you would be directly from the customer's portal. If the customers are in the portal, which if they would be an ESEGO registered provider, they have to be in the portal at a certain point in time. We'll have a transition plan. But in terms of for an auditing airline variation, I'm not necessarily going to tackle that now. But to me, what is important, if they don't perform the IGOM procedures, is because there's an airline variation. But I don't believe you necessarily have to check that they perform the line variation correctly, because that becomes an a la carte audit. No, it's not anymore an IGOM audit. But that is something that we can discuss forever, and we are not yet have a clear.
Yeah, no, I understand what you are saying.
May I comment on that, please? Because I think you're right. Because when I'm also a handler, so when you are there as an auditor, show me your system, how you see the differentiations of the customer airlines. I can show you the portal, and I click on Air Canada, for instance, and there you show the variations, and the rest is complied with IGOM. So you can use it like that. I fully agree.
Yeah, that's what I want to say. You probably will need to know which airlines, even for the sampling. Now we are going to auditing technique very briefly. You will also need to see when we are selecting which turnarounds to look, you need to be aware that this one will not be followed. So that's a very valid point. I think discussed it something and we might have it somewhere. Do I have an answer? Probably no, but we took it, yeah, fair point.
So any other general question about the tool in general? How does it work? Or yeah, please.
Yeah, so the tool seems straightforward to use, at least it appears at this point. But my question was like, typically when you do a documentation check, you're checking the manual, and then you're checking his reference, and then you're reading it, and you're trying to ascertain whether it really makes sense, right? So when you're doing it on this tool, you're saying that the GSP has already put his gap analysis,
Correct.
and we do some random ones out of that, but then we are validating it against the original document which he has uploaded and
Correct.
given the reference number.
Correct. So you do exactly what you do today when you
Okay.
do an Ezego audit, or at least when I was an Ezego audit, that's the way you do it. Huh? So you
And
check
those
it.
auditor action items and all that will also probably be
I
different.
I don't think we're gonna make auditor action. I think we have an IGON procedures that can or cannot be followed. If it's not followed, there should be a reason why, right? And that's it. So this should be more simple, straightforward. So, and I think perhaps yesterday, I don't know, I didn't attend the session. Caroline and Gurdeep have explained how they intend to pick from an IGON procedure certain elements that are more easy to observe, let's say auditable or observable. So I think that was already explained today. Okay, so forgive me. They're going to explain exactly some methodology to check a particular item from observation perspective, but from documentation perspective is no different on what you're doing today. Exactly. So you're going to check in their manual the reference that they essentially cover the same procedures somehow. Anything else? Yeah, please. Please. I guess.
On documentation, and you will hear it again and again.
Yes.
Intent is not that you have to check word by word that the IGON procedure is copied and followed. A handler or airline procedure needs to fulfill intent of the, you will see probably 90%, maybe 99, copy-paste. But if you don't, because the specific word is not there, it doesn't mean, as long as if you read it, whatever you sample, it meets the expectation of the IGOM, and it's simple, you do this, you do that, it's not like you should have a process which includes guidance, right? It's very simple. As long as it meets the intent of it, that's okay. And I think we move on. Huh?
I hand over, I think, to either Gurdeep or
Yes, thank you,
the others.
Massimo. Thank you very much. I think I need some help with the technical because I can't see the screen on my system.
Would you?
Yeah, I'm doing the duplicate, but it's not taking the duplicate. Screen. Fine. I request Chief to explain the chapter 3 and also the how we're gonna do the colors and everything, notes, caution.
Okay. We started this year what is effectively a two-edition amendment process of the IGOM under the title of Ramp Simplification. In it, we intend to do a number of things. Where possible to reduce duplication, where possible to further improve the process on a journey from minimum standards to best practices, and as well to restructure it in a consistent way such that, A, if you were reading it, it would flow in a chronological way in terms of the overarching structure at a section or subsection level, and B, within a section or subsection, if you read it, for instance, in this chapter, in chapter 3, and you were reading about a ULD loader, the points would have a natural sequence. So you wouldn't go from a general operating point to a how you remove, to a how you position, to how you operate, but instead it would go through from a specific safety, then through into positioning, operation, and then removal. And we would then repeat that throughout in order to improve the readability and in order to show the world, if you like, that the manual knows and is how an aircraft is turned around at an airport anywhere on this planet today as we sit here. Chapter 3 was and remains two major subjects. One is equipment operations, that I've already mentioned, and the other is aircraft servicing. Within the equipment operations that we're going to take a look at now, you've got a number of introductory sections and then the specific subsections to each of the pieces of equipment. Here, as examples of the amendments you may see, we have taken out, for instance, in each of the applicable equipment types, the point that says ensure that safety rails are lowered prior to positioning and are immediately raised once positioned at aircraft. It's a generic point and it fits far better when it's stated once in general safety and basic operating requirements for equipment operations. So that's a very simple example of the change that you would see if you sat with edition 11 open and the workbooks that I believe you've got, which represent the content that is on the screen now. What I would say is that looking at this on a spreadsheet is probably as different for us when we're used to reading it in a manual as it is for yourselves when you're looking at a procedure. So please don't worry too much about how it looks on screen. I guess that may be exactly how it will appear to you on a checklist nonetheless. But our intention today is to take you through each of the sections. It's possible, and certainly I would hope that many of you would have had chance to at least have a look at the workbooks, if not to have fully digested them. But within each of the sections or subsections, you can read the flow and the points, whilst we, JJ and myself, along with Gurdeep and Caroline, will talk to a number of points, perhaps one or two points in each section. Certainly as we go through, we would most certainly welcome questions, feedback, comments. This may be billed as training, but certainly from JJ and my point of view, we would much prefer to see it as a conversation. So please do speak up and let us know your thoughts. Final point. This is, as Jessica said at the start, a work in progress. Requirements of the modern age, thanks to COVID, has been both advantageous and disadvantageous to us as the operations group. We've been able to meet more regularly with a fortnightly meeting conducted via Teams, as well as face-to-face meetings. We were in Paris, the operations group, at the tail end of last week in order to consolidate where we've gotten so far with the change. But the content as you see today, I think, is probably 95% fixed and may well appear in edition 12. But it is still subject to that final fettling to make sure that everything is 100% correct and as we want it. And on that, I would say that part of the feedback, you're experienced auditors, you're out on the ramp. If what you think could be further improved, or if you've any suggestions on the content that you see that we're proposing for edition 12 is absolutely something we'd be delighted to have and to listen to. So also think of this as we go through the next hour and a half from that perspective too, please. But we'll start off looking at some of the sections. Lastly, though, column D. Is it big enough? Yeah, column D. We have done the exercise to identify which of the points are procedural and will therefore be auditable, and which of the points aren't auditable. And you should see that where you see a yellow box with no, if you read that content, it will either be a note, or it'll be a caution box, or it'll be a danger box, or it'll be descriptive text. So it's not something that you're going to observe a ramp team or a ramp person doing at aircraft whilst you're doing an audit. And again, if you see any obvious mistakes we've made and wish to challenge and say, why is that point auditable, or how would we audit that, or indeed, we think that point should be auditable, and yet it shows a no, again, we'd be delighted to hear from you. So,
may I add one more thing? This is for today, but as you're going into the field, again, when you see something which is not correct, please give feedback to us, because we do not see everything, especially not all around the world. So that's also important for edition 13, 14, 15, which will have to come. Living manual, somebody said, and that is what is going to stay like that. I will take some notes from your comments, so that's why I have my computer here on stage with me. Please continue, Steve.
Got it. Could you just scroll it back up to the top of the page? Okay, so there's some introductory text, and that's just to my point around where it's descriptive text. We don't make that auditable content. In row 9, it's not actually a directly auditable point that you may observe around an aircraft, unless actually an incident of aircraft damage is discovered. I guess it would be auditable by asking the individual or the team leader what they would do in the event of damage. But that's the only point that we suggest is auditable in that first introductory section. Then we come down into engine danger areas. Again, although these aren't directly procedural points, they're more things that people shouldn't do in terms of putting themselves in a potential hazardous situation. They are things that you should be able to observe as an auditable point. If you keep going down, JJ, is this example?
This is not the one from yesterday, but I will get the highlights from here.
So if we keep going down, you start then getting into the equipment restraint area, an equipment restraint line. Row 26 is obviously easily observable in terms of equipment and personnel outside of the ERA prior to and during the arrival process.
That was the one highlighted, 26 and 29.
Well, just stop me whenever you've got your points to add in. And then foreign object damage. Clearly, and it's been a procedure for a long time, there is an absolute requirement to conduct a FOD check by the team handling the aircraft prior to and after, prior to arrival and after departure. Not surprisingly, therefore, this is an auditable point. And there, from row 34 down, is how the team shall conduct the VOD check in terms of where it will take place and when it will happen.
This is new, the PPE.
Yeah. Do you want to take that section?
That's what we took over right now from the AHM, where it was mentioned, but it was never defined as a procedure. And it was also, as a GOSARP mentioned, to wear that, and we put this in edition 12. So, and this is absolutely auditable standard procedure. So then we go further to general safety instructions.
I think just one point on the PPE, if you were to read row 43, all personnel shall be issued with and wear appropriate PPE as required for their role and as per local regulations. We then suggest safety shoes, hearing protection, high-vis clothing, and gloves. It may well be in an airport that not all of those items are going to be mandatory, although the word shall at the start maybe think it is. But clearly, they are examples of what we believe as best practice should be mandatory. But on that point, you would obviously have to check what the local regulations stated if you, for instance, observe people who weren't wearing gloves. I certainly would be very disappointed if at an airport around the world on the ramp people weren't wearing safety shoes, high-vis or hearing protection. But it's worth highlighting that we're not saying that those 4 items quoted are mandatory everywhere.
Questions?
Okay. Thank you. I want to ask a question about safety shoes because I know that someone is from US and OSHA, they don't require safety shoe with, the metal to protect toys. So we have some argument with some handlers that I work with. What is the requirement? Because airlines require, especially global airlines coming from Europe and Asia, they require safety shoe, while OSHA said it's laser working shoe is that working laser shoes fulfill the requirements of safety shoe. So what is the way forward to classify to avoid ambiguity among the industry? What is safety shoe? What is the specification of safety shoes that fulfills this requirement?
Well, I think you give what is a good example as to why this doesn't absolutely say anywhere in the world, if you're ISAGO compliant, you shall wear safety shoes. Certainly, it's a best practice recommendation. But if, in the example, I think you said that the regulator only requires leather shoes, and the ground handlers, staff who you're auditing are wearing leather shoes, then in relation to the last part of that sentence, in accordance with local regulations, they're in accordance with local regulations. To the point about a customer airline, I'm not absolutely certain I understood the question, but if I've got it right, if I were a customer airline flying into and out of that airport and saw something I didn't like, i.e. my ground handlers staff not wearing safety shoes, I guess it would be up to the customer airline to make that a part of the contractual requirements maybe, but I don't know. That may not have been that part of the question that you asked, so apologies if it wasn't.
And again, there is a variation process for IGOM. So if you variate on this specific topic, you can have a safety assessment next to it why you didn't implement it. So that could be the outcome there.
Right. So can I suggest something when it is the case where these things are suggestions or because they're not even recommendations, right? So when you listed those 4 items, safety footwear, hearing protection, and so on, that's not even a recommended practice, as we would call it. It's actually a suggestion. Am I correct?
This is best practice, so yes, it is,
okay.
If you like, another word for recommendation.
So in terms of the way that it is written, so that the auditors know how to distinguish, perhaps you would say such as, in those cases. Because when you read that, if we would be reading that as we read now the GO-SAPs, that would be a requirement.
Yeah.
It would be a standard.
Yeah.
And we would look for those 4 things.
Yeah.
And
That's
if
correct.
they didn't have them, it would be a fine.
Okay. So if we had examples...
Or such
detail below.
as, like,
Okay.
whatever, standardize on a sort of wording so that we know that then actually it's just sort of guidance for the things that we could look for, but actually those 4 items are not mandatory.
Okay. Good point.
Maybe just to chip in, when the GSP does the gap analysis, okay? So for example, they don't wear footwear. As the auditor, you will not all see that. That's the big difference. So you'll only audit the things that are applicable to that GSP. Remember, the initial stage is the GSP will have performed a gap analysis. Then it will come to IATA to either say audit is ready. So if there's a situation whereby we see you variate, because you're allowed to variate 90% of the items you variated, then IATA will advise. So the difference is you will not be seeing items that have variation, for example. So if I'm going to the US and they don't wear footwear, what I'll remain with, because they have said in their gap analysis, we only do hearing protection. That is what you will check. That's the difference. Because in the gap analysis, they'll already have filed a variation and the reason why. And this is a safety critical element in IGOM. In the introduction section of the IGOM, section 4.3, the group did a risk assessment of what is safety critical. This being a safety critical element, they need to do a risk assessment. We've not agreed whether we'll be auditing the risk assessment, but now in the process of auditing, you'll only see what is applicable to the auditee.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they can do variation on everything. So
If they do variation in everything, then they are not ready for the audit.
No, hang on. But the suggestion would be only to indicate those elements that are actually suggestions, and then they wouldn't even need to file a variation for that. Because if it is just an example, if they are not, because it depends on the local regulations, of course. So they would actually, in their procedures, they would write what the persons need to actually wear. Could be totally different, let's say, for the sake of the argument. So the suggestion was simply to indicate in those cases where it's actually just guidance or suggestion or what you would prefer to call it, then there would be a sort of a standard phrase in which everybody could clearly see that it was just a suggestion, not actually a standard to which they would need to file a variation.
It's not suggestion. We are in compliance with IGOM. IGOM says that you either do or you variate. Simple. If you cannot comply, we recognize there might be local regulation, then you do variation. But IGOM, as a best practice, says those 4 points. They have to do the risk assessment. Simple. So they either do, I want to implement IGOM, I don't have to do it, and I can do all of it. I want to do something else, I variate. Yes, we still don't know the guidance, what we do with if you audit risk assessment. Most likely we will put it to organization level, but yes, exactly. So
basically, at the end, we have to assess the risk assessment, or it is done before?
I think it will be part of maybe documentation, but we don't have that yet. We are on how again, so keep it. We are here on what we are looking at, but please put it in your mind. IGOM is the best practices. ISEGO audit is changing towards verifying company implemented IGOM. If company cannot or don't want to implement, they have to declare variation.
This process is similar to acceptable means of compliance process in EASA?
Sorry?
In the European...
Monica, do you want to take that on EASA?
It's like in Europe, acceptable means of compliance? Is that the process?
Yeah,
okay.
And the outcome, for an example, for my company, I give a letter of approval to that station. So, and that's the difference on my standard.
It's a compliance audit. So regardless what is there, regardless how it is written, should, shall, whatever the language in IGOM is, you are auditing against the IGOM. So you are auditing compliance with the IGOM provision, regardless what the language is. So if they don't have certain things, then it's gonna be non-compliance, and as such, it will have to be audited, yeah? So, of course, you are saying they can have a variation on everything. Yes, they can. Absolutely, they can. But in this case, they won't be eligible for ISEGO audit, yeah? And the level of variation that we are seeing, and we are seeing it primarily from the airline's point of view, It's very limited. I think, look, KLM, we have a JJ over here. KLM was the first airline that joined IGOM portal and submitted the gap analysis. The number of variation was like 26?
23 and 6 of them in the safety critical area. So I had to do something there. I needed to do a safety assessment. And we filed that, and when we see an auditor or an inspection, etc., we can show them that.
Yeah? But even the one that they submitted, there were maybe just more like an addition rather than variation, you know? So they comply with what IGOM was saying, but they had something maybe in addition to that. However, one more comment. I see that Max and Luis had a question. From the ground handlers, we don't expect that, you know? I know you said, okay, only once they join the IGOM, we will see what is the true level. But because we are separating the gap analysis assessment from the implementation, so once we look at that and the gap analysis submitted, we will be able to establish if they are eligible for the ISAGO audit or not. Because if you have a variation on 90% of IGOM provision, then again, when we're not gonna audit IGOM compliance, it simply doesn't make a sense. So this is why the gap analysis will come first. We will know the output, we will know the level of the variation, and then we establish the next step. But those are operating business rules within the program that we have to establish. But again, from all the major providers we hear, they have no reason to deviate. That would be stupid to do so, you know? But now we have a portal, Massimo showed you the portal, so we will exactly know and see if the variations are there or not. And now I see a lot of questions. Sorry, I didn't want to. So it was Max, Luis,
I have the
Peter.
microphone, so I'm first.
Max.
I've got a microphone, and I'd have said your name first too,
Awesome.
Max.
No, actually, just a comment. I mean, this is clearly still a work in progress, and you cannot have the answers now. But this is a perfect example of the complexity we're looking at, because, you know, we've talked about local variations, et cetera, but then there's also the expectation that civil aviation authorities have of airlines that are operating abroad. So, for example, the UK CAA has an expectation of BA operating elsewhere, an expectation of safety shoes and PPE, et cetera. And 90% of the airlines in their manuals have requirements for PPE. So it's very complex, and I think it's too early to even, you know,
No,
be
Max,
talking about a solution.
this one is simple. This one is actually very simple. Because ISAGO not gonna give you what BA wants. If BA implemented IGOM, here's the answer, and ISAGO is your audit. If BA did not implement IGOM and they want 1,000 of their requirements, then ISAGO is not for you. It's simple as that.
But then you have to be careful, because you can have a GSP where there is no local regulation, and in some countries of the world that doesn't require that, and there's no requirement of safety footwear, for example, and GSP can simply variate out of it, but yet we're lowering the bar of safety, and you're not meeting what the airlines are expecting of you, because the airlines want the IGOM implemented. Right? That's the whole, we're mandated here because the airlines want the IGOM implemented.
Understood, but then this is different discussion.
Exactly.
Because if you believe that there is something missing in the IGOM, or there are some safety provisions that are not properly documented in that manual, then again, that's for these task forces, that exactly for gentlemen like JJ and Steve, and of course the team, Caroline, with Gurdeep, they will look at that, they will assess it. But that's a different thing, because it's related to IGOM. Because at this moment, the airlines and the ground service providers, they voted on IGOM, and they are happy with the way it is. Of course, there's always space for improvement. You will see the next edition, they are doing for the changes. If there is more to be done, they will do it. But at this moment, it's good to go. It has been used by hundreds and hundreds of airlines worldwide. We have to start somewhere.
No, but we're not saying the IGOM is missing something. What we're saying is the GSP will say we are not going to implement that safety footwear requirement, and here's our variation.
Correct.
And that's the case.
But again, it goes back why ISAGO was not successful or hasn't been, because our major challenge is that we didn't have the pickup from the airlines, yeah? And the airlines said it very clearly. GSPs are unhappy because we don't see a reduction of the audits, and the airlines were saying, I would love to accept ISAGO audit, but I don't know what is the benchmark, because any process can suffice. So I don't know. So providers shall have a process. I don't know what the process is. So now we are saying, here's the process. ISAGO will validate that this process from IGOM is implemented. You have your own variations, well, go and audit them. So BA will go, they will reduce maybe, I don't know, day and 2 from their station audit. They will have the results about Chapter 11, IGOM, SMS in ISAGO, And if they have their own specifics, they will audit them on their own. And that's the new concept.
So just one question about the IGOM conformity. You were saying, for example, if there wouldn't be 100, they could conceivably have 100% non-conformity with the IGOM, and then they wouldn't be ready for the audit. Are you planning to have some sort of a limit on that conformity level?
Yes. Formula not yet worked on, but yes.
Okay.
There'll be a level before stage 2. Before it's given to the copper auditor, there is a review. Just to, if you have 75 variation, then there is no point of an audit. However, where the challenge is coming, and we are working on it, for example, you have Etihad, where the variation is they have more than the requirement. So we have to work on a way that, where, for example, if I do safety footwear, hearing, then I have 8 others. You variate a little bit, but not really. So we are working.
It's not actually a variation in that case.
Exactly.
It's just supplementary, right?
What we didn't want to start fighting with the airlines is, do I have a lesser variation or a more variation? So we have to work on those terminologies as they fill in the gap analysis.
A bit of a practical example from a GSP perspective, and I can't give you an absolute on behalf of every GSP in the world. Yourselves who've audited them would know, but let me just give you what I would imagine you'd find from a GSP. And we, Donata, have a global ground operations manual, absolutely 100% written around IGOM, apart from in a very small number of cases, where when we put it in the portal, it will be a variation. But I can assure you that those variations will be actually more restrictive. There is no way as a GSP I would offer to my customers, nor train my staff in something that wasn't compliant with what IGOM said. Practical, easy example. Donata, we still believe in a brake check outside the ERA and one at 5 meters. Because I don't want a piece of equipment to get to 5 meters from the aircraft before we find out, because we didn't do a brake check 15 meters away, that there's something wrong. So for us, those 2 brake checks are and in the middle. A couple of editions ago as IGOM, as part of our collegiate group, we took out and maybe you'll know it now, says or. That's the only kind of practical difference you would see, I believe, in the main with a GSP who wants to service airlines. Other variation, you come and see my operation and I'm servicing BA and it's a conversation early and I'm doing something that's not in accordance, and I'll show you the British Airways variation as to why I'm working in that method, not my standard method. And let's face it, ladies and gents, at one point in the not too distant future, maybe we'll get to a point when standardization, which drives automation, and we heard the CEOs say that very thing, will mean that we'll all work the same way. And it'll be that way, that document way.
Can I? Maybe I skipped this, but related to the local variation, Max was saying something similar to my question. The point is we will not audit, of course, the documentation, that is very clear. But whenever there is a GSP that is operating in all over the world, we know that local variations and governments can put them to force them to change something. So when we are about to evaluate the implementation, we will surely need to take that into account. How we will do that, it's not clear to me.
Well, there's probably a IGOM portal stroke answer to it. One of my colleagues will cover that if there is in a minute. But practically, again, an example from a global organisation, yes, you'll find one global procedure for the operating chapters and ultimately perhaps for HQ2 for ORM. But if a station did have a local state regulation that meant that we had to vary something, because that's the only other example of variation you see, then if you were doing an audit on Donata Sydney, you would have the global DGOM, and then if Sydney is listed with a variation, it would be driven by something like what I've just said, a state requirement for a safety reason that that health and safety executive had a different approach. So you would still see it for a global GSP, and I do not believe that the other GSPs would be able to set their portal up in any different way if they're using one global document at a top level. Chap at the back.
Yeah, I have a confirmation. I just want to confirm something, especially to Monica, because if the new change is just to do the audit to check compliance with the IGOM, then the variation feature is the variation feature applicable for only the airline, because if we say that the COPA members or auditors audit the GSPs based on the IGOM standards, and if they don't follow IGOM standards, and it's non-compliance for sure, even though they come up with different variation, because that is a minimum standard we expect them to meet. They may have a very restrictive variation, which is up to them, and it's a plus. So just to confirm, do we allow any GSP to vary from IGOM? If we don't, are we expecting them to have gap analysis on the IGOM portal?
Well, most of that question is kind of more.
The GSP is allowed to have a variation. Yeah, GSP is allowed to have a variation. It's a very simple concept, like the procedures are written there in the IGOM, and if I'm a GSP, I do not follow this, then I have a variation. I'm allowed to have a variation, then I will do the risk assessment. Fine, and you as an auditor, when you come for the implementation, you already have that, so you don't have to audit that. It's an audit against the IGOM. Whatever you see in the implementation, yes, those things you have to audit, but as we said, that the formula, like how much, like if I'm 90% documentation okay, 95% okay, that we have to still work on, and we are working on that. Fine? But at the end of the day, this is how it is. Because if I read this, all personnel shall wear. So these are the 4 minimum requirements. Globally, GSPs, every GSPs are now also wearing this. And this is the minimum requirement of most of the airports and also the airlines. So if there is a variation, we had mentioned that and. Fine? It's and as per local requirements. So if I'm a GSP, I will say, okay, my airport doesn't require a safety shoes, leather shoes. I have a variation. Finish.
We want to make sure we leave the judgment with the airlines. The report is there for the airlines. So the minute, again, GSP completes gap analysis, as Steve said, Denata, I don't know, 120 stations globally around the world, and their company has one variation. So again, we have seen it. We don't think that ground handlers will have that many variation. If there are some variation, they will be primarily locally driven, so by the airport or by the Civil Aviation Authority. They will be declared through the portal. So you will get the self-assessment through the portal that will be validated, and that's what you're going to use when you're going to be auditing. So you will already know if there is a variation and where. The risk assessment doesn't have to be performed if it's not a safety critical item, yeah? So the risk assessment is completed only. And then if we're gonna be auditing a risk assessment, we just said we don't have a policy yet for that. Maybe it will go back to the corporate assessment. No policy has been established. If we're gonna be auditing the local variation, we haven't established the policy yet. Maybe you can look at them. Again, local variation driven by the airport or CAA, policy has not been yet established if it's going to be part of the scope. Airlines variations, no. We won't be auditing them. We leave it within the airlines. But again, so let's even imagine that you have a ground handler that is totally different than Denata and makes, I don't know, 50 variations from IGOM. maybe they will be eligible for the audit. So you do the audit, we establish all the assessment, and then we send it to KLM. And KLMs look at that and say, what is this? I'm not going to be dealing with ground handler that has a 50 variation. That's basically not for me. There's a, here you go, value of ISEGO report. You know who to choose. We leave the judgment with the airline. It's not our call to make.
And usually, with my experience of the GSP, as Monica said, the GSP will have minimum variations, minimal. Why? Because they're not handling one airline. They're handling like 40, 50, 30, 60 airlines. So if the one airline, I'm just giving an example, because airline doesn't say don't wear a safety shoe, that's the minimum requirement. If one of the airlines says don't wear a safety shoes, but other 59 airlines says wear a safety shoes. So as a GSP, that's my policy in my documentation also, I adopt the IGOM safety shoes. That only one particular airline, if they have a variation, I will mention for that. Finish. But it is still under me as compliance, because I'm doing it. I'm following that procedure. Fine. So shall we move, we proceed further? We have a long session, and you'll have a lot of opportunity to ask other sections also. Yes. Let's talk what. We are still working on how. Steve?
Okay, so 3131 is, as I've said, general safety instructions for those insomniacs who the last thing they do at night is read the IGOM in order to help them go to sleep. You'll recognize a few new items that have been moved up there into general safety instructions. And likewise, if we scroll down a little further into basic operating requirements. There are some new points in there, rows 61 and 62. We've added in, I can't remember now whether they've been moved into equipment operations, some other parts of the document, or whether it's new content, but I highlight them because if they're examples where we've moved it in from another section, you start to get the flavor of it makes sense to put all operating requirements that are applicable in all cases into one place, rather than to have to look for them across different pages of the manual. And likewise, as I said, the point I made earlier, right at the top of the screen now, in row 64, we don't need to say that 6 times. When put it in here, in a section that applies to all equipment, is a much more productive and effective way of stating the procedure. Safety rails shall be lowered prior to positioning 2 aircraft. The point about guide persons, I guess that's another one where you may say, that's a difficult one for us to judge. It's not absolute one way or another. Shouldn't we have a case where we either say all equipment shall be guided, or we make it no equipment shall be guided? Well, unfortunately, it can't ever be as simple as that. It can't certainly ever be the case that no equipment ever requires guidance. But for instance, were you to say all equipment must be guided, if you've ever seen a set of drivable passenger steps being positioned to a narrow body aircraft type where the operator's looking about a metre above him, I've actually got a picture of it. There's a guide person standing a metre from the person, and psychologically there's no way that human being can look over there when he knows that what he's positioning is a metre above his head. So it still remains something that during an assessment you need to assess against the requirements, which is when the operator's vision is or may be obscured, or if the operator is unsure, then a guide person shall be used. So.
Right. Can we actually go upwards to the handrail thing? Because it ended
64.
in where possible. If we're talking about the what's and not actually the hows.
Yeah.
So we're, no, above.
It's where possible, and,
Yes.
and it's a good question from the auditor's perspective. And I think what the value of this session is we sit as operational people writing a manual, and we know it's going to be used in future as the audit, but it's not got the audit language. So straight away, your question is, what's where possible? And I can give you the operational, the operational experience as the example where we wrote where possible rather than left it as an absolute. And as a simple, obvious one, if the guardrail is actually welded in a vertical position, you have to say where possible.
That's a simple enough case.
Yeah.
Though I was actually thinking about, for example, conveyor belts. Some conveyor belts have two positions to raise the handrails. And, for example, to cater for different aircraft and different fuselage shapes and so on. For example, the 737s that are rather low, you can use those sorts of conveyor belts where you can latch the handrail in a sort of a semi-retracted position, not to touch the fuselage. If you're using the same conveyor belt in the 320, you would put it in the other position, right? Now, the trouble is that not all conveyor belts have that, and I've been to stations and actually raised findings on operators that were using conveyor belts that, since they did not allow to raise to the single position of the handrail, it would touch the fuselage of the 737. So they wouldn't raise it. Now, it is not possible for that model of conveyor belt, but there are other models on the market, or they could even modify that, to actually have one conveyor belt that would be able to provide the protection of the handrail to their people whilst not touching the aircraft. So their model of conveyor belt is not possible to raise it, but there are those in the market that are possible to do. So if we accept that they don't raise the handrail, then it is actually an unsafer practice.
But this is also the present requirement of ISEGO in the HDL section or the AGM section, where they ask that regarding the GSC, when you position to the aircraft, you should the safety rail shall be raised. So how you guys are auditing that?
Well,
because the GSP gives you the procedure. Fine?
The way I just mentioned, actually.
No, because the procedure says that provider shall have a procedure to ensure wherever the GSC position to the aircraft, the safety rail must be raised. So this is the requirement for the present ISEGO.
Yeah.
Fine. So you go to the GSP procedure. GSP say that yes, we are raising it. Because you are saying that for some of the aircraft, it's not possible, some of the aircraft is possible. So there is, we have not changed the fundamental of ground handling.
No, okay,
Right?
but I'm even forgetting about the GOSAP. I mean, just talking about what's written in there, because that's going to be our standard, right? So in this case, what will be our decision?
Yeah, so where we had, as Steve said, that where possible, because we understand what exactly you are saying, and we agree with your point, some of the aircraft have a restriction where you can't raise it, as you correctly said. It's going to touch the aircraft, fine? So those are the possibilities and the situations where now also you face that when the GSP can't raise it. So that's why it says where possible, but then you can always question the GSP, they will give you the answer for that. And then yet you can take a decision on that.
I think
it's only 1 or 2 aircraft, I think there is a variation for that.
I think with this point, let's just take one step up or back, whichever way you prefer to go. That's in green font to signify new. I can absolutely assure you it's green font because it's moved. That is not a new requirement. The point about raising and whether the aircraft type allows the guardrail or the safety rail to be raised is covered as if you can't do it physically because of the aircraft type. That's there. But this, where possible, isn't new. But it is physically saying if you can't lower the guardrail, you can't lower the guardrail. But this isn't you. You must have been auditing to this point if this appears in the GOSAP for the last X years. No, but it's not been changed. That's the point I'm making. That text is only in green because we've taken it from elsewhere and put it here.
But we are talking about lowering, right? Not raising.
In this
the point
case,
in 64 is about lowering. Exactly. So that's different from raising.
Yeah, but
exactly.
The gentleman raised a point about you can't raise it at an aircraft. That was my answer to the raising.
Okay.
And the other point which is very important, because these procedures are the global procedures. You know, when we were writing this, we are dealing with many GSPs around the globe. So there are, as correctly you have pointed out, some of the GSPs still have the old equipment which you can't retract. It's a fixed one. Some of the GSPs have the retractable one. Some you can fold like this. Some you can remove like this. So there are a lot of GSPs and a lot of GSCs options in the market. So we can't put a one fixed standard basically looking at the new GSC.
Okay. I think we got to about line 74 and the guide persons. So if you want to move on down. And as I've said earlier, whilst we're having these discussions, if you are reading the points, if you've questions on any of the other points that we don't discuss, please do mention them anyway. Hang on a second. Just want to, the microphone's just there.
Yeah, just for the color coding question, on the right-hand side, you have all the greens where the yes is written and the yellow for the no. But on the left-hand side, what is the difference between the black and the green? Because on the right-hand side, they're all green, but on the left-hand side...
The green font, as I've said, is something that is new in that section. The reason it would be new in that section is either because it is a new point that's been added, so you wouldn't see it at all in edition 11, or because we've moved it somewhere else in the manual under the objective to achieve simplification, reducing duplication, etc. So that's the only difference between a green item in the column C and the black font.
And maybe just to assist, in the documentation process, the green area, that's where there'll be a symbol for change. So when the airline or the GSP is doing the gap analysis, they don't have to read the whole manual again. It's, to be able to show them where the changes are. Once we publish the IGOM, the colors will not be there. This is work document. If we agree, for example, something doesn't make sense, we strike it out. This is how we work in the working group.
Okay, if we can just move on into equipment types.
There's one more about no-touch policy. I think we should be aware of that. Mm-hmm. If you go down a little bit to S. There it is.
Ah,
yeah.
I've missed the no-touch
This is
policy.
How could you miss it? In the current edition 11, it's only written you shall have a no-touch policy. That's it. There's no definition, no clearance, etc. This is one of my variations as KLM because I will define the gap because I find a gap like this, but maybe you will find a gap like this. And that's why we defined it as 5 centimeters. A lot of discussion also in the group. And I'm also asking to you, you have to see it on the ramp, how the no-touch policy is implemented. And we now came up with 5 centimeters, 2 inches, or 2 fingers shall be maintained. Is this the right description? Or is this auditable? How do you see that? Because I think almost every airline has a no-touch policy. So. Sorry?
That's where the airline variation come in.
Yep.
Because we can observe 20 different flights, 20 different airlines, and see 20 different applications of the same procedure.
Yep.
So we need to have access, and we need to have visibility on the variation from the airlines.
Yeah, and we are looking for the worldwide standard, so that's just the question where it should be.
But you know how much we spend in chocks and cones positioning.
We're not going to begin about chocks, and not anymore, no.
Well, I hope so. But how long does it take to have a single and common procedures for everyone? So that's why the variation of the aircraft are there for.
Yep.
And then we are moving back to apply whatever the airline says to apply, and not to have a common procedures that you can apply to every single airline in the airport.
Well, that's what we're looking for, of course. But
yeah, but this way seems to be going to the other.
Okay.
No, the aim is to standardize. Again, before you go for an audit, the gap analysis shall be done. That's the basic. We will not allow you to audit an airline or a GSP, a handler, that has not complied with the IGOM. That's why, as IATA, we are driving implementation of the IGOM to reduce on the variation. And the reason why we want to track variation, because we want to understand why. For example, if everyone 91, they say there's a variation, of course, the working group will know this procedure. We need to understand why the variation. We will see the members, we will call, and we'll deliberate and try to see how we can improve the standard. Go ahead.
From the GSP side, variation will be very, very few.
Yes.
The problem is the number of variation of that GSP has handling 40, 50 different airlines. Because he has to apply all the variation that the airlines ask them to apply.
No, see, I'll repeat again. The variation is not against, the GSP can have a variation against the IGOM. We are not auditing the customer airline requirement.
I understand. Well, formally, the GSP would not have a variation on that specific procedure, but he can apply that procedure according to the variation required by the airlines.
And that is why we are pushing the airline, the drivers, for the airlines to do their gap analysis. If we have, this year, the target is to have 60 airlines in the IGOM portal, right? If all 60 airlines have 91 as a variation, as IATA will know there is a problem.
I don't know if this helps, but let me just give you my non-auditor's view of that process. So you have done a remote audit of my documents. My documents is a thing called DGOM, and I've got next to no variations. Where you've seen the variations, the requirement is, and let's just take my one example, because we actually maintain 2 brake checks rather than having an or. Okay? So you come out and you come and see me, and we're going out to stand, and you say, I want to go over to that stand, and I know it's British Airways, and I know there's a variation. I'm going to go and grab the BA safety alert or the BA manual, the relevant document that says, you won't see that, you'll see this instead. If you wish to, and if you can, via the portal in advance of check BA, so be it. But I'm going to have you, as far as I'm concerned, audit me remotely against my document. If you see a variation that isn't mine, I will show you why it is my team are working in a different way to what is in my manual. And it will only ever be because I'm told to by a customer airline.
Hello? Does it test? Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Today, the ISEGO standard is general. It says you have to have a checking process, and that's it. So when you are going and auditing particular ground handler, one is doing the choking this way, another one may be different way. Okay, choking is probably not the best example. Let's take coning, One puts 4, one 5, one 6, whatever it is. The airline don't know, because there is no proof in the audit report what's the coning policy. Because, again, you just put a document reference, we don't require proof of implementation, and there is no evidence. So they have any process, and you don't know which process they have and how the process looks like. Tomorrow, every single ground handler that will be audited according to the new system will know that there are 4 cones required because it's written in IGOM. And that's the beauty of the new setup. So how can you say that it's different and then we are going against harmonization?
Sorry. But this is the way we were auditing until yesterday. So the minimum standard was in the IGOM. So everything that was different from the IGOM was company requirements. That is everywhere in the GOSAPs, okay? So, and that was the, let's say, the worst thing to verify was the different variation required from the aircraft, from the airline, sorry. But the concept of having a process or a procedure to cone or chock the aircraft, it was clear to any one of us. So at least you have your own, and then you apply all the variation. And your own cannot be less than the IGOM because it's the minimum standard.
Yeah.
this ISAGO never says that you cannot go below or above ICOM. At this moment, as you said, you have to have a process. But the process was different from one company to the other one. So we didn't drive the harmonization. But because we are forcing IGOM implementation by the provider, we are actually supporting the harmonization and standardization. Because today, every single provider can have whatever they want, because again, any process or any procedure suffice. Tomorrow, it's not going to be like that, because we want IGOM. And that's the major difference. So we thought that's the beauty. That's what the airlines ask. I'm telling you, we had a multiple discussion with KLM, British Airways, Lufthansa, and I said, I cannot reduce my audit because I don't know what you are auditing. Any process is perfectly fine because the standards are so generic. Yeah, of course, maybe the HDL, AGM were not as generic, but many of them were. Choking procedures, whatever it is. But tomorrow, when I know that you are auditing, again, a predefined set of procedures, I know that if I'm happy with IGOM, I can skip that, I will not audit it, and I will focus on my differences. So I will not go to the station and be there for 2 days. I may go for half a day, or I audit my SLA requirements, but I will skip training, I will skip SMS, I will skip, IGOM, because I will get the proof in ISAGO. And this is why we listen to the airlines, and this is why we are doing this change. Sorry, back to you, Steve.
No.
Bartu?
I just wanted to make 2 quick recommendations. One is that we were discussing at the GOG meeting that no-touch policy does not have a maximum gap defined. Here we mentioned 5 centimeters. Could that be the maximum instead of giving just the generic distance?
There is some work to do on the no-touch policy. We've and that was the point of JJ's questions.
The point for here.
If you track back a year, and indeed into edition 11, when it comes to the actual position of a piece of equipment in an aircraft, there are two keys. One says shall be a minimum gap of 5 centimeters, and there's a variation if the equipment's actually got proximity sensors and auto leveling devices, in which case when the equipment is stopped or when the rubber bumper lightly touches. But that's the minimum requirement. You shall maintain 5 centimeters. And then there's this sentence in the PBB section, and it's here now, and it says shall not allow a person or a large piece of equipment to fall through. That's been in there for many editions, but it's quite a wide gap, isn't it? From maintaining a minimum of 5 centimeters to something that won't allow a person or a large piece of equipment. I mean, it's okay if a small piece of equipment falls through, because that could only perhaps fracture someone's head, but we don't want... So we tried
And what is a small piece? Interpretation, blah, blah, blah.
And what's small, yeah. So we tried to make it better, but where we got stuck, and this was JJ's question, is can you really say a maximum of 5 centimeters should be the gap? Because what was now the minimum is now the maximum. And is there an actual danger that in trying to get to 5 or less, an operator would be more likely to actually over-egg it, and we'd end up with more aircraft damage? So this has got some work to do, but from an auditor's point of view, the other thing that would we expect the auditor to be carrying a tape measure? Oh no, that's 5.2, sorry. So it's certainly worrisome from a practical point of view in terms of the impact on an airport right now and an equipment operator. But there is also the feature for this room today, which is how would you do that? Has it literally got to be that?
We had one question there with the gentleman in front of you.
Just if
with
I
the white
can also
shirt.
mention my second point before we move on.
Yeah.
In the exceptions, we need to add the enhanced GSC as an exception as well, I believe. That because today we have equipment installed with aircraft damage prevention systems. There are already sensors that detect the compression against the aircraft.
is no touch policy required to be applied for those units, or can it be added?
That's an exception which we have defined there.
It's not there.
If you see that exception, no touch policy does not apply to GSC and passenger loading devices which have a self. Are you talking about different technology?
I'm talking about aircraft damage prevention systems, which is on belt loaders, steps.
We could
medical
add it.
lifts,
We could add it
etc.
along with the self-leveling sensors.
We will
part, I
add. We
think.
can add that.
But as I said, I make no bones for it, and we outlined to you, this is a work in progress. 90% will be unchanged, but there are some bits that are still important that we absolutely ensure we get right.
But it's good to define that one. I will take that with us to the group. But for now, the gentleman in the white shirt on the first row, you also had a question. No, not anymore? All right. Any else?
Maybe it was said before, but in this moment I need a small clarification. So the final checklist for to verify the implementation at the station will include only those IGAM requirements that are 100% declared as in compliance in the gap analysis, or the
That's correct.
That's a question.
It's correct.
That's correct.
So we will audit at the station. We will audit against
Correct.
IGOM. So
Correct.
no discussion about variation of the GSP.
That's correct. So if I am an auditor, I'm going for on-site. If my checklist have 50, I will only do 50. If my checklist have 100, I will only do 100.
Okay.
I'm talking about the on-site audit now.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a still discussion, but otherwise.
So.
In a how? Let's look what?
Yes, but there are a lot of questions about variation. So the only gray area is about variation of the airline. If they declare they follow IGOM in the gap analysis, and we see on the ramp something else, this should only be variation of the airline.
You mean to say gray wording?
You don't touch. And
You're talking.
no, maybe I'm confused worse than before.
We are pushing for harmonization and standardization, and here is your role. From IATA, what we want is that the airlines do the gap analysis. And this tool is going to allow us to identify the number and the quality of the variations. And we want the airlines and the GSPs to realize that they will have variations that have no sense. So the intention is to decrease those variations. And as Monica explained, like what we want is just to audit IGOM, nothing else. For the variations of the airlines, when they do their gap analysis, they will have to realize how against the industry they are with their non-reasonable variations, and they will be forced themselves to reduce those because it goes against the industry. It will take us several years, yes, maybe, but you have, and what we are insisting all the time is about the what, the how, we haven't got there. So just think of this, that the goal is to standardize and reduce those variations. The fact that you are not going to audit the variations or there's going to be safety risk, that's the steps that we will take further. But it will take us a couple of years for the airlines to realize that they have variations that do not help them in their agreements, in their performance, in their safety, and so on. So this is where we are heading to. It will not be easy, maybe. We will have many cases and so on, but let them finish with the progress with the checklist. I think we have explained the same concept several times. We don't have the answers. We don't have all the answers yet, but this is the intention. This is where we are heading.
It's clear now? Against the IGOM. Whatever as an auditor I will get the checklist for on-site, that is the only you have to audit.
Very clear.
Full stop.
Very clear.
Steve.
Is there another question? No. Okay. I'm not sure if you are, but I'm conscious of the countdown clock here that says 6 minutes 20. So I'm going to move you on. We'll just have a quick look for the last few minutes at the content, again within 3, but we'll just look at this example, ULD loader. Again, if you see anything, please ask. I guess all we're really looking at here is to give you the option just to get the sense of how each of the individual equipment sections will follow the chronological sequence from positioning through to removal at the end of the turnaround process. For those of you familiar with the ramp, this should be second nature. Anything green in here is pretty much just moved. In this case, in many instances, it's just moved. Let's say it used to be item R, but now it's moved up into its right chronological place and it's item E instead. So don't worry about this and think, crikey, they've added in a whole host of new equipment. Key point, we haven't fundamentally changed the way that you handle an aircraft with these changes. It's about simplifying and improving the layout and the flow. So have a read through those. I don't know if there's anything in particular. I'll have a read through and see if there's anything I would highlight to you.
B and F we talked about. Yeah.
Steve will give them a small brief about the PBB.
Well, I was going to B and F.
Sorry.
B and F, but we can also go forward to the boarding bridge. That's fine.
B and F?
Yeah.
Those are ones we'd highlight.
Yeah, that's what we said yesterday.
Okay, yes, that is a good one. Row 192, top of the screen. And again, we highlight it because we thought that maybe this will raise some conversations with yourselves. This is a new point, but only personnel required for the ULD loader operation shall be on the platform whilst manoeuvring. It's a shall, but you might find 6 people on the platform with the operator. Are they all required to be there? And can JJ, can we answer that absolutely for you here and now? No, we can't. It would require a conversation about why they're there and do they need to be there whilst they're actually having the equipment position rather than climb the ladder once it's in place. Practically, if we talked about examples, I guess it could be a line trainer, because you can't observe a trainee positioning a ULD loader as well from the floor, the ramp, as you can from the operator platform. But it's not an absolute. It's an absolute in terms of we don't want to see 6 people up there whilst it's positioning. But we recognise that we can't give you absolute clarity on that point from an auditing perspective. But you would need to speak to the people and say, why are you here? What's your role, etc., I guess. And I'm sure that today, in today's auditing environment, there are questions that you have to ask in order to determine whether something is still in compliance or not. And then point F, did you say, JJ?
Yep. Do
you want to take that one?
If I can read it. Yeah, that's also a little bit of the positioning on the height of the angle of the cargo compartment floor. That's what you see. The aircraft is moving, of course, and we were just wondering if this description is okay for the audit and clear. Yep. Then we continue to the bridge.
Yeah, the PBB will explain you because this is always a section which creates a lot of confusion.
Famous discussion, is the PBB GSE or is it part of infrastructure?
Is it a GSP role or not?
My question was about still with the ULD loader. We had 3 no's over there.
Good point.
Why the no's in this case?
No, those are yes.
Those were 3 of the things
those are
we
yes.
found yesterday, Gurdeep,
okay.
that we corrected in your spreadsheet.
Yeah. It's already been corrected, but very clear. Yeah. Thanks.
As I said, the two-day face-to-face meeting was here last week. We left Paris, was it Thursday afternoon?
Yeah.
Thursday afternoon, and then flew back again on Sunday. So it's literally as hot off the press as that. So if there's still some admin-y type stuff in here, apologies. Right, PBB, was you... saying?
It's below this one, good.
1 minute 22 seconds. I think probably this is just a quick look. PBB?
Now the PBB section, just a moment. Now it's very clearly mentioned the operator of the passenger boarding bridge, not the GSP, or if the GSP is not operating, this is not applicable to them. Because I know the ISEGO has 141 to 148, and we always have a confusion, 141, 142 is applicable or not. Some says yes, there is a no. So there is always a confusion about, is it a GSP role, should they do something, or is it airport operator? So there was always a situation. But now it's very clear in the IGOM, we had mentioned it, the operator of the PBB. It says the operator of the passenger boarding bridge, whether it's a GSP, third party, or the airport operator. Fine? So if GSP is not operating, straightforward, not applicable. No confusion. Okay.
I think that's it.
Yeah. Is there any last questions from anyone? Lady here.
Jessica, are you going to take some more time?
Just one question about that. The operator of the loader must be there alone on the platform. Is it confirmed like this, or are you asking us an opinion on that?
No, the point I was highlighting is the point says only authorised personnel should be on the operating platform whilst it's positioning. For us, that's the operator. I don't want to see 3 or 4 other ramp agents just because they're going to go inside the hold and start operating. But I can't give you an exhaustive list, because now I'm writing this with an audit in mind, when usually we sit there and we write it purely with an operational procedure hat on. So the point I was highlighting was that in order to determine if you were at an airport and you saw 3 or 4 ramp agents on the bridge, you'd need to ask. I can't really make it clear in that. I gave you one practical example. If the guy's under training and there's a line trainer with him. But
there are a lot of cases where could be cargo, freighter, or even during normal pallet loading, that you will usually find more than one person, because
but then it is positioned, and this is while positioning.
Operating.
So by driving
yes,
the ULD. That's
positioning a pallet with the loader
no, this
already
is positioning
there.
of the load at the aircraft.
Okay, so moving the pallet is not in that question, you mean?
There are some points, and we're going to run out of time, but we have put some points in there about when someone should and should not be on the platform when a ULD's been manoeuvred, because unfortunately there have been a number of cases where actually manoeuvring a ULD on a platform whilst another member of staff was on there other than the operator, and the ULD's knocked the poor person straight off the platform. So you will find some content in there in terms of the operation.
Yeah.
If you've any queries beyond today, I'm sure we would all be more than welcome to answer.
Because you know that airlines, most of aircraft have, I say most, but I'm an auditor, come on, numbers. But there is a certain percentage of aircraft with in-flight systems.
IPL,
is
inoperative.
So so you will see it a lot of operators trying to push the pallet in. That's why it was.
It's daily operation.
Yes, I opened that to the floor to discuss that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.